Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. I am so fortunate to be able to work, live, play, and have these amazing conversations on Kulin Nation land. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam, and welcome back for yet another week of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. If you'd love to join us in the conversation this evening, please text us in the studio on 0493 213 831. And hello and good evening to everyone joining us live on YouTube as well. My guest in the studio tonight is Nela Trifkovic, a Bosnian Australian musician and performance maker with 25 years of practice in music and theatre. She studied music composition, piano, voice and performance at WAPA and VCA, where she completed doctoral studies in 2013. Nela's practice is formally grounded in composition and music performance. In its performance aesthetic, her work straddles borders of music, ritual and storytelling. Since 2013, her main project has been as artistic director, composer, arranger and singer in the ensemble Sare Iluminado, original compositions of Balkan and Sephardic Jewish folk music and original works. Nela and the ensemble have performed extensively nationally at festivals and venues such as Mona Foma, the Melbourne Recital Centre, Signet Folk Festival, Fojam and others. In 2019, a trio version of the ensemble made a European debut at the folk music circuit in Italy. Nela loves working in multifaceted environments and bringing together professional artists and various members of CALD and BIPOC communities united in a common goal of heart-centered creative expression. She has performed, composed and presented academically in Europe, Asia, Australia and the USA. The bedrock of her work is to always create more room at the table for those who are rarely present and remain unseen. Welcome to the program, Nela.
Thank you for having me. First time in an architecture program.
Not first time on the radio.
No.
Not at all. So glad to have you here, and you're actually the second musician that I've had on the program.
Amazing.
So those intersections of world making through music and soundscapes and music as a backdrop to our urban life together is what I'm really interested in unpacking, and I'm sure the listeners will be as well and will join us in the conversation.
Great.
I do wonder, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
Two come to mind, and I can't tell. I'm just going to call them an equal first. One was my grandmother's house, which was my absolute favorite place, and the other was, and it was also my one of my favorite places, knowing where the local music school was, because I grew up in Bosnia, or in Yugoslavia at the time, in Bosnia, and our education was such that there were like specialist performing arts schools that you attended outside of school. So I just knew always where the music school was, because that's where I really wanted to go when I was a little bit bigger.
What was that building like?
That building was chocolate coloured, and that certainly appealed to me.
like a milk chocolate?
Yeah. And also it had these really, really long, almost oval-shaped windows, and I found that really curious. So, but the other amazing thing about it was that through those windows you could see students practicing, because there was, an X amount of practice rooms and rooms with pianos specifically. Because back when I was a child in the 80s, a lot of kids didn't have a piano at home. So they would also go to the local school and practice. So it was just my favorite, I just couldn't wait to be on the other side of the window. Yeah.
And those windows, they looked onto the street.
Yeah. Yeah, and they were like on the main street, on one of the main streets of the town. So you basically got to bathe in children learning music.
I love that. It's like a street gallery.
Pretty much.
Also puts what you love and what you centre and value straight in the middle onto that street life and view without hiding it away.
Definitely.
I love that. We need to do that more.
Yeah.
Actually.
Centralise music schools and make them more visible.
Yeah. Here. Your grandma's house. Tell me about that one.
My grandma's house was, again, it was like in the CBD, so it was pretty central. It was in one of the main streets, and that house had just really interesting, I don't even know how to say it, English, like the glass windows, the vitrage and it was...
Like a stained glass window.
Yeah, like a stained glass windows or sort of, stained glass cubes on the door.
Ah, yeah. Lead light door.
Yeah, and these really, really beautiful, really heavy, round door knocks that are really particular to Bosnia. They're really particular to Sarajevo, to the capital, but also where my grandma was in northeastern Bosnia at the time. And our door knock had a cat on, and I love cats, so it was just everything was to my liking.
Could you reach it when you were a child?
Very, very quickly I could. I was always a very tall child, and I'm a very tall adult, so probably by grade 1 I could reach it. By 6 I could reach it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
When did you finally get to go inside to that music school?
The following year when I was 7 in grade 2.
Wonderful.
So that was, so I took my time. I conquered grandma's house first. Then I conquered the music school. And then I conquered the third important building that I didn't mention, which was a little bit almost, it was naughty because it was the local pub / eatery. And my father is a practitioner of different types of Balkan folk music. And he often had a gig there. And I was really pushing to just go and visit Dad, like just before my bedtime. And my mum was really rigorous with bedtimes, and my father was a scientist and is a scientist and a gigging musician. So their views collided in very interesting and unusual ways. Needless to say, they didn't stay together. But my thing was just to elbow in a little guest spot and have a little sing.
And did you get those slots?
I did eventually, but I think that took me maybe till about 9.5, which felt like a lifetime. But I wanted to do it before double digits, and I did it before I turned double digits, and so...
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's very much an accomplishment.
Absolutely.
What was that pub like?
Full of smoke, because it was at a time where you could smoke indoors, and certainly in Yugoslavia. But what I remember... I couldn't understand why we weren't allowed in, because I just thought everyone was in a good mood. Now, to this day, I can't tell you whether they were tipsy, drunk, in between, both, but I just thought everything's really beautiful. Music flows on tap, and it's full of people expressing themselves. And I think there's nothing more horrifying as a 9-year-old girl than that you can say to your family then, I want to sing folk music and I want to be in places like this forever. And I prefer it to the music school. So I think I was sort of sent to the music school to avert my gaze from the local pub, but my gaze was already firmly on it. So,
was your creative career supported and encouraged?
Definitely my training of classical music or Western classical music. With the traditional music, it was something like when you come from that part of Europe, you just do it. We just all do it. And one of the things that I enjoy about being in the Western Balkans is you go to a house party and 25-year-olds are jamming, and 19-year-olds and 17-year-olds are jamming on folk music. And original music. And when you watch The Voice from those countries, people audition with folk music.
Wow.
And are really kind of relaxed into that identity and loving it. So, but back then I think there was also this sense of if you're going to do music, and certainly coming from a very academic family, let's then academize this, and you study classical music. And you do it as far as you can. So there was support, but there were definitely conditions of how to approach it if that's where I was going.
Rigorous structure around that.
Absolutely.
I'm really interested in this idea that the party songs or the hangouts were folk music. It wasn't imported American pop or imported foreign pop. even nearer countries, right across the Mediterranean, for example, or further afield in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
It was centering that soulful home music in a way.
Definitely. And I feel it's also like, that kind of music also facilitates cross-generational discourse. So I always say my grandmother was my first soulmate because I just really enjoyed chatting with her. I enjoyed watching her, like, she used to roast her own coffee and not sell, but do it for her family and friends. So just hearing her sing, watching her roast coffee, watching her make Turkish coffee or, pulverized coffee, because I don't know if it's Turkish, if it's Greek, if it's Lebanese. It's actually Ethiopian. Many would say, so I'll just call it pulverized coffee. Yeah, so there's that vehicle. And then when you kind of learn that happiness, that's what you naturally take with you.
That's so beautiful. I'm wondering if I should ask you to play a song to set the scene for our listeners and help bring them into your world a little bit so that we can have that sound. Perhaps turn around when you're in the garden, a Bosnian folk song.
That's what I was thinking. So this is the Bosnian genre that I sing is called sevdah. That's the vocal form, and Sevdalinka is the name of the song. And it's specific to Bosnia and Herzegovina. But sevdah as a psychological state can be found in music of the Western Balkans, and it's a little bit like fado in Portuguese. It's the state of longing, state of nostalgia, a state of desiring to return to a place that no longer exists, but you sound recreate, you bond with the sound architecture of, and so those songs live and reimagine even, after wars in those parts of the world, after the physical world has disappeared. We still sing, and I mean, the bridge has been reconstructed, but we still sing songs about the bridge from Mostar, which, went again in the 90s war. This particular song, Okreni se niz Đul Baštru, Turn Around When You're in the Rose Garden, was actually written in the sort of late 19th century in the style of sevdah for a theatre show that's entirely set in a rose garden.
Stunning.
And yeah, so it talks about the love that can't be, but you can't let go of either. So sometimes you just busy yourself by passing that person's rose garden and hope they'll turn around and look in your direction. That's the gist of it.
We can't wait.
Okreni se niz Đul Baštru, na vrelo kad pođeš. Okreni se, nasmij mi se, medna usta, crne oči, zumro moja. Medna usta, crne oči, zumro moja.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Listeners, that was Nela Trifkovic singing Turn Around When You're in the Rose Garden a cappella live on Radio Karam.
Thank you.
So beautiful. The walls, for me, these walls of the rose garden just formed. It was a cocooning, rich rose garden, secret garden almost.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you should say that, because a lot of the architecture of the places we're describing is such. And one of the, I won't say uniquenesses because there are other genres, but specificities of sevdah is that sevdah is the sound of urban environment. Frequently with folk music, we find that it's rural music and it describes rural lifestyle. Sevdah, again, much like Portuguese fado, actually narrates of city life, or as the Greek would say, it's politiko, it's of the city. And Sevda developed from sort of the end of Ottoman Empire through the Austro-Hungarian, and it really followed how the kasbahs turned into towns, turned into cities. It followed the urbanization of Western Balkans, of even specifically, you could say, the formation of the city of Sarajevo, the capital, the formation of today's Bosnia, today's Herzegovina, the way they came together into a country. There are lots of songs that look at different historic moments that are perhaps pivotal in the creation of the cities.
Amazing. What's the musical element that creates that feeling for us?
The musical element or elements are akin to many different musical elements, say in Greek music or Turkish music, music of the Middle East, and it displays in certain rhythmic structures, say in additive rhythms, which are of these particular regions, the fives, the sevens, pineapple, apple, apple, is how we teach it in Australia, but I do have a drum. Zapjevala sojka ptica, misli zora je, aman, aman, misli zora je. So that particular seven, with a long, short, short, long, short, short, was in rural music, it's the rhythm of the harvest and the way you cut the grass and collect it. But in these urban, that's particularly like in Bosnian music, it's often said that it's music of women's wedding songs and particularly like women's gatherings. And I'm pretty sure this is not true, but I remember whenever we dance it, my grandmother would say, it's the parquetry groove because you slide and then you catch yourself. I don't think that was, ethnomusicologically confirmed, but it was, again, an interesting like anecdote of lived experience and somebody who attended, tens and maybe even hundreds of weddings and women's gatherings before weddings, that she had that idea. And of course, because we take shoes off when we go into houses, and if a person didn't have house slippers of your size, you were left in your socks or stockings on parquetry. So I remember her coming from an engagement party and going, and we danced seven again, and I almost killed myself on the parquetry. So that rhythm always stays with me as, the wedding dance performed on dangerous parquetry.
And amazing how that intertwines with the memories of place as well.
Absolutely.
What's one of your best memories of Sarajevo?
Probably the artists' gatherings that I've experienced, both prior to the war and as a child, going for music competitions and music gatherings, but also the name of my ensemble, Sarai Iluminado, means an illuminated palace, combining a Turkic word and a Ladino word, Sephardic Jewish word. And what I consider the illuminated palace is a particular fountain in the center of the city called the Sebil Fountain. And this is a really significant place of gathering. It's a dark wooden fountain built in a Moorish style.
Wow.
And oftentimes in summer, there are like live performances and gatherings. There are some formal gatherings there. Often poets will present on a hot night. There are nights of different cuisines being shared, but also it's a place where people hang out creatively. It's very common to say, if you want to jam with someone, meet me at the Sebil Fountain. So again, how architecture, lends itself to feeling comfortable in the city and how places evoke and promote creative activities.
Yeah, and becomes a stage for that also intangible cultural heritage.
Yes, absolutely. I was just thinking about it, Melbourne, you go somewhere like Section 8 and you see people dance and there's no separation between the DJ but we don't have too many street open places that you would, you wouldn't just go, meet me in front of Maya and we'll have a jam.
Meet me under the clocks.
Yeah. Meet me under the clocks in Flinders and we'll have a jam. If you're jamming, you're busking. There's
Yeah.
a purpose, but we'll have a jam and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's creative places in public. Interesting questions about the right to perform music in public. In the city of Melbourne, you need a busking license.
Yeah.
Can you comment on what you would love to see in Melbourne or in the Australian musical scene that could be informed by your experiences? Like what did you have back in Bosnia that you'd love to bring here?
We have it when we do concerts. One of the reasons why I returned to folk music from classical music, apart from, trying to find myself as a refugee background person in Australia, was I was talking to someone the other day in another interview and they said, what do you have in Sevda or Sephardic music that you don't have anywhere else? And I don't think you don't have it anywhere else. It's particular to music, but I said to them, you have collective intimacy. I can be jamming with 20 people in the room or on a stage with, 500 people in the audience at the National Theatre. And we can experience that intimacy that is often reserved to experiences with one person. And sometimes as we move in and out of kind of couple-centric life, often that experience is also relegated to your romantic private domain. And you just have that. And so what I feel I experienced as a child was just seeing and feeling, perceiving a lot of people being casually intimate by jamming, which I guess you're describing a musical experience. But I think once, you stop, you listen to a busker, you have your experience, but there's sort of rules of engagement, whether you can make a donation, where you stand, how far. I would love to see more music and love shared unobliged with that spontaneity and with, and with blurring of the boundaries.
And it's a real civic and public experience and something it seems we're desperately missing in society. Like there's all these conversations about the epidemic of loneliness and searching for that to the point that, recent conversations of thinkers like Brené Brown are suggesting that people are going to search for intimacy in AI and search to externalize it. But sometimes we can just return to some of those really core, simple things like music.
Yeah, definitely.
And jamming and sharing space. You mentioned concerts. You've got one coming up this month. It's already May.
Oh, my God, it is
too. I know, that came really fast, 1st of May tonight, at the Memo Music Hall. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that one?
Sure. And that concert is a little bit of this kind of exchange. It's called The Gathering, and it's my first collaboration with Lamine Sonko and his trio. He's a fabulous Senegalese musician, actually musician, dancer, and a theatre maker. They're sort of the West African folk version of a triple threat. What they call triple threat in in music theatre, but I don't have, almost like a holistic performing artist and culture keeper. He's also a guevel, which is the traditional word for a culture keeper. So one thing that we share is that we might be buoyant and humorous in interviews, but actually culture is quite serious.
I'd say you're a
spiritual. Yeah,
I think I'd say you're a culture keeper as well.
It's a really profound experience for me, and it's given me a chance to delve into spirituality but avoid organized religion, which I really loved personally. Yeah. So we're presenting a concert of music from the Western Balkans meeting West African music at Memo Hall on May 19. And we're going to present individual repertoire, but also come together and share repertoire and just really look at this. We both have this urban experience. Lamine spent a lot of time in Dakar, Senegal, in the capital, and comes from an artistic family. And so we're just really debunking the way that artists are often siloed. So I'm a Balkan artist, he's a West African artist, and you have Middle Eastern artists over there and, Japanese artists over here. we're actually really debunking that and coming together in song and humanity and shared experiences because we're so alike.
Amazing. It's ironic, right? At the same time, everything will then be geotagged and categorized as world music.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're siloed and then you're lumped in.
And somewhere in the cracks in between the two you exist and make work.
A metaphor for life almost. How can listeners purchase tickets or get in touch with you and find out more about the concert?
Absolutely. You can get in touch with me. You can just go on Memo Hall website, memomusichall.com, and just look for The Gathering, easy, or you can look for Sarai Illuminato if you remember the band, or just come to me directly, Sarai Illuminato on Instagram, or Nela Trifkovic on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll give you all the information, and we can probably organize you some extra love and extra other perks if you contact us. Yeah.
Tell him you heard it on Radio Architecture.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it might be time for another song, actually.
It's I don't know if you ever saw that play Mercury Boys. It's a fabulous kind of queer surrealist show set in East London, and there's a recurring line where the mother of the boys says, "I feel a song coming on."
I certainly feel a song coming on.
Okay.
This will be Nela Trifkovic on the drum. Well, what's this drum called?
This is called the frame drum. That's its most generic name, and then depending on sizes and the country that it comes from, this size and coming from like former Yugoslavia or Greece, it's often called daira. The larger Iranian version is called daf, but they're united under the banner of the frame drum.
And listeners, if you want to see Nela holding up this drum, jump on YouTube where we're broadcasting live to right now. You'll be able to see her play. And you're going to play Zemi Karida, which is My Beloved Daughter, a Sephardic tune in Ladino.
Hija, hija, mi querida, aman, aman, no te eches al amar, que el amar está una infortuna de la que te me llevar. Que el amar está una infortuna, mira que te va a llevar. No me lleve, no me traiga, man a man, 7 funtas de hondor. Me engluta a un peche preto para salvar del amor. Me engluta a un peche preto para salvar del amor.
Beautiful. Bravo. Bravo. Are they moving? Are they running? Are they dancing?
Okay, so the Sephardic repertoire that I sing is their romances. So they're secular women's songs. The liturgical repertoire was performed by men in the synagogue. But these particular songs, because they were shared amongst female family members, are often shared at home. And the way I presented just then was also very relevant because they were shared, a cappella or just with a simple drum or whatever you had at home. And so they covered topics of the broader, themes of love and grief, but then inside it you have the microcosm of female relationships, mothers, grandmothers, daughters. This particular one is dating advice. So the mother says, my beloved daughter, don't you rush to the sea. The sea is a great misfortune. It could swallow you. Once I went and the 7 waves swallowed me, and then a black fish swallowed me and I suffered love. And I often wonder whether the father is a black fish, but I don't know. It's certainly, you can certainly tell that it's advice that this young woman is not going to follow.
There's such energy and such movement, and I personally very much enjoy the world music genre without needing to know the language, without needing to understand word for word. There's such pleasure in that.
Absolutely, and I think that there's pleasure in taking in the experience of the sound.
with Sephardic music and Ladino, is it the same representation of the urban realm and the life of people?
Certainly has, more, a bit like with Sevda, they're not exclusive, but they're so heavily bent to the urban sound that they're probably, somewhere like 70-80% urban, and then there are some more pastoral songs covering, things like, but we don't know in Sephardic songs necessarily, even if people are fishing, they might still be in a seaside city or town. Those tasks and themes that are often, immediately rural in some other music that its conception with those genres. You just have to follow and research and, follow your nose researching the history of that song. And 9 times out of 10, it leads back to an urban experience, because these particular songs migrated with the Sephardim from the Iberian Peninsula to the Balkans, to the Ottoman Empire and to Bulgaria. When Turkey got populated, then Bulgaria, then territories of former Yugoslavia, and also took on a lot of what was going on there. But I remember there is this other song, Mi Corazon, that I used to sing, and I was talking to a friend who's an ethnomusicologist in Ceuta in southern Spain. And he's not of Sephardic heritage himself, but he said something really interesting the other day just in a chat that we were having in Facebook, and he said to me, have you noticed how many of the Sephardic songs you sing, all the action happens on balconies?
Oh, really?
And I said, actually, you're right. I've never thought about it. The action does happen on balcon all the time. And he said, it's because Jews always live above their business since the Middle Ages, and when we were really looking at Toledo, or Al Toledo as they called it back then, as one of the sort of pilgrimage places for Sephardic music. And he was like, yeah, of course, you live above your pharmacy, above your jewelry shop, above your, clothes shop, whatever it is that is your business. And oftentimes it's your daughter that's on the balcony, and it's some lad under the balcony, or not, or it's your daughter, and we've described that it's some lad because you weren't supposed to say back then that there was another woman under a balcony, or but it really does speak to
those liminal spaces.
Those liminal spaces, but also really to what the demographic was and what their professions were, and what people were doing.
And what their life was like.
So Bosnian songs, lots of cobblestone, and a lot of people, live in alleyways, particularly like in Sarajevo and outside of Sarajevo, and when places were kasbahs, which is almost like a precursor to town, everything was cobblestone. And there's lots of mention of cobblestone. And then there are rhythms and onomatopoeic words like ripa-rapa-rap, tsinga-tsanga-tsang, which
and you're
means,
clattering the cobblestones.
Yeah, which means my heels on the cobblestones. Say this. The edge of my dimie, which were particular loose pants that Bosnian women wore, are saying ripa-rapa-rap, and the heels are saying tsinga-tsanga-tsang. Yeah.
So in the rhythm, in the music, in the lyrics, this soundscape is being painted, and the sound texture, as you said earlier.
I don't think that's a word, but let's go with it.
We'll go with it for this evening. The architecture created through sound, in music, and the world building that's created. I wonder about your original compositions. How much does thinking about the sonic landscape and imagining worlds play into your composition?
Well, definitely an awful lot, because one of the things that I noticed that happened to me was in an attempt to preserve good Bosnian, I also started reading like very old literature. And I mean, when you sing folk music, you can't help but not engage with really olden time language. But certainly when you read a lot of that, like if you were reading a lot of Shakespeare or, a lot of some other medieval literature, you would start to engage in language, and then it sort of stays with you and you think about it. And so for me, there's the architecture of that language, and often the poets whose work I work with might be contemporary poets, but they might write in that almost like medieval style or something like that, and really quoting, trying to preserve it. And, you know, with Ladino, you're talking about really a dwindling, dying language that is, you know, there are elders in the hundreds, like any community, any place that we talk, we're probably talking about people in tens or hundreds that actually really speak it, and then you have descendants that might have phrases.
In a way, it's cultural preservation as well, continuing to sing these songs.
It is, and I think for me, it's also a little bit of cultural. I don't like to use the word activism because I don't know if I'm strong enough and dedicated enough, and if I rise up to the level of an activist. But it takes a lot of strength sometimes, particularly when you've come from a place where, like, I myself have seen that Yugoslav conflict in the 90s as a child, as a teenager. It takes a lot of strength and personal courage and kind of personal reorienting of the self to go back to it. And it's not a question of love. It's a question of, you know, being prepared. So it's almost like, for me, when I went back into it, I was having a micro-revolution. I mean, I wasn't revolutionary in any larger societal or political sense, but there was certainly an experience of almost a little emotional revolution. And I think a lot of people who feel that they are other for whatever reason, whether they're immigrant, refugee, you know, whether they have felt excluded or experienced something like that, we're all going through a micro-revolution all the time.
Grappling with our sense of self and our sense of culture.
Yeah, definitely. But also, like, grappling with that sense of, if you have an otherness to you, how much do I share? How much do I practice? How much do I share? How much, you know, how much is for me? How much is for me and my community if you're involved in it? And how much is for me and for everyone? How much is enough?
No, that's so true.
How much is too much? Yeah.
I think that's a universal question that people of culture, I heard this phrase used to describe anyone of really diverse backgrounds, grapple with, and particularly when you're briefly returned to architecture, trying to bring a building into existence and you're doing community consultation. And there's this moment of the community needs to, in themselves, find this moment of sharing enough information for the design team to do their job, and also enough information to, or rather not so much information that they hurt themselves or hurt their own community by giving too much away.
Yeah, amazing. And that's a complex, like, you know, it's almost like a tightrope.
It is.
That you're describing.
Or a swing bridge, a really flimsy swing bridge.
Okay. I'm experiencing vertigo already.
It's I guess the creative process and the idea of living the questions that nobody has answers, really. And we need to continue in that creative uncertainty in a way. You can't cling to a rigidity, otherwise what good innovation is going to happen?
Yeah, well, because it's sort of not what it was even after we've spoken about it. Yeah.
Interesting though, at each mention, does it take on a new life?
Well, it certainly takes on I don't know, does it take on a new life? Does it take a new spin on the life that it's living? Yeah, that's a question that I'll probably spend my life grappling with.
What's your creative process like?
Complex, messy.
I guess I am interested in the details as well. Not just the words you use to describe it, but how is it that you work? Where do you write your music? Where do you sit? What kind of a place do you like?
Okay. Depending on whether I'm working on, original music, or whether I'm researching Sephardic music or Sevda and picking more arrangements, I actually still love libraries. And I'm a big fan of libraries as, places of knowledge. And I know, like, every time there's a petition, save a library, I'm there. Yeah, so I do like being in libraries. I do like being surrounded by physical books. I do really still love, and I've actually been making a conscious effort to return more to paper books, because I do feel like even though technology has become second nature, because I'm, of that generation that has experienced both, and you make transition, there is something where sometimes when I just look up at everything, and you can just sit there and hear something and immediately type it up and look up. You're listening to music and you go, oh, I'm really interested in that rhythm. It's not a Balkan rhythm. I wonder where it's from. I'm listening to blah, blah. I know I'm listening to an Indian or a Pakistani artist, so let me just quickly type in some Indian or Pakistani rhythms. That's really quick. It's really swift. But it's almost like disassociating. I like the gravitas of picking a book, flicking through it, experiencing it, reading a chapter on something. So I really like to be in places, whether they're a library or a cafe, where there's a sense of grounding. As you can tell by the way I'm speaking, I myself am a person that can often fly off, so I really do like conscious grounding and consciously slowing myself down, because my music is draft in motion. I don't know if there's ever a final, even with the through composed. And the older I get, the less through composed stuff I do, where I score everything, because I think part of the important thing is the adaptability and giving your colleagues the trust.
It's like jamming
devise.
again. It's like coming back to that jamming
it's
around the
definitely-
fountain.
It's coming back to jamming. It's also coming back to, speaking of the intimacy, to enter in those relationships with people where, people in my band are of all sorts of heritages, but they're not necessarily Bosnian. They're not necessarily Sephardic Jewish. So to enter that discourse where you go, I give you of my heritage and you give me of yours, and I trust you, and let's see what you bring. But going back to places, I like to be in places. I like being in bookshops. Like, I'll often be sitting in bookshops with headphones in, trying to find a book to buy, to read a new book. And then I'll just leave the bookshop. Hopefully I haven't taken a book and not paid because I've had a thought that I want to work on a song, or I quickly write it down and go on. But for me, it has been a lot to do with books. I've always loved books and notebooks, and I still write with a pencil. Don't hate me for it, listeners.
No, we love it, and I think a lot of creatives really connect to the physical paper and the physical notebook. Certainly when I was a student in architecture school, at the start of each semester to get that new fresh notebook was that exciting ritual. You pay way too much for your really fancy designer notebook, but it was such a pleasure.
I was going to say, did you have some amazing notepad or something? Yeah.
I can't even remember the brand now, but it was from that fancy stationery shop or the art supplies where the students got a discount, but it still had that lovely notebook and kind of thin minimalist feel, that pleasure of the physical material.
I remember when I was studying, and initially I'd studied classical piano, and then I wanted to move to study composition and voice. And the person that was teaching orchestration, he was my teacher while I was a piano student, and I orchestrated a few things for a school assignment, and he said to me, have you thought about studying composition? I really like the way your brain works, and he really liked my sound architecture. And I was kind of dying to study composition, but I didn't dare. I thought when you've studied classical music your whole life and you come from my part of the world, you just think, I'm not worthy. All those composers were genius. How can I possibly proceed with this? And then he proposed it. And while he sort of asked me, have I ever thought about it? And I remember during that conversation, he took out this stunning, huge A4 notepad with his compositional notes, and I was just like, I have to study this.
And then you get
I have to study. I'm going to be in the course where they use notepads. I found my calling.
Phenomenal. And you've done a bit in the theatre world as well.
Yeah. I've always worked ever since undergraduate days. Theatre is a big love of mine, and I think having that folk side to my family, folk side practice, I found that kind of immediacy and ability to jam. I think I found that initially more in my theatre friends than I did in my music friends for whatever reason. I think as classical musicians, we were just really stressed and really focused on have we practiced 50 hours a week or something ridiculous. And actors were, playing with little proficiency and a lot of passion and love, and I just kind of fell for that. It reminded me of my dad playing folk music. So I just went and hung out with them, and then changing to composition gave me a perfect opportunity to put myself forward and write music for plays and theatre shows. And my husband runs a little theatre company, so we met in a theatre show and we collaborated, and I really loved kind of propelling independent Australian work by doing that. And that's another architecture in itself, the rehearsal studio, the acting studio, and the dynamics.
And the composition for theatre, it's really very much the act of world building.
Yes. You're building their sonic, through building a sonic world, you're contributing to their emotional world, the part of the emotional world that they actually definitely can't verbally and often physically can't express. So it's almost like, you're taking on this liminal acting role by being a composer. Yeah.
What's been some of your favourite productions?
I've loved a lot of different work that I've done. I really enjoyed about 7 years ago working on a production of Medea with this gorgeous cast of a couple of male characters as it is in the show, but it had a huge women and female identifying artists chorus, and I really loved working with them and working with all of them performing vocally live. So that's certainly a show that's really close to my heart. And also in 2019, I collaborated with theatre director Deborah Lisa Moore and a group of women on the show called Unhoused, which explores, the little-known Australian homelessness, the homelessness of mature women that are still on our streets, but we don't quite notice them.
And the largest growing homelessness demographic.
Yeah.
It's just very much an intersection of so many themes that we talk about on this radio program.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I just remember watching, there was an episode of Insight with Jenny Brocky with women who were formerly homeless. They'd all been housed. And I remember watching it with my mum. I was visiting her in Perth, and I said to Mum, we're both refugees. And, I mean, you're a dentist, but I'm a musician. I'm always 2 paychecks away from homelessness. As a freelancer, if you're, or even not as a freelancer, you're frequently a couple of paychecks away from homelessness. So it was, again, coming into immediate contact with that. And all of the cast that was involved in this show had experienced homelessness in the last 15 or so years.
Oh, wow.
Nobody was homeless at the time of making the work, but just to create a platform for visibility. Because, let's face it, you're also dealing with mature age women, and visibility of an older woman or an older female identifying person is not great, let's say.
Yeah.
They need a gig at My Fountain in Sarajevo. We certainly don't give the time of the day to people. So it was a really incredible experience and a humbling experience to enter into as a person with war refugee background, to encounter that kind of invisible Australian, I don't know if you could call it a war, but it's certainly a state of national turmoil.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What amazing casting and representation. It's always described as the number one pivotal thing, that the lived experience of a character should be played by actors of that lived experience. And to hear that they were able to do that on the stage is incredible. It's such a heavy content, as is the classical story of Medea as well. Very, very heavy themes. How do you shift into that headspace as a musician, as a composer?
I guess the repertoire that as you heard, the repertoire itself has a lot of gravitas, and is a lot of it is embedded in yearning and not hiding away from the dark matter, but in fact rising through it and finding a new beginning. So I often actually listen to, like, folk music that I like, or even classical music that I like. Like, I'll just listen to existing music of other artists that speaks to those themes, and just let myself be inspired by that. I might read the script or whatever it is and listen to some music. Sometimes I just cook and listen to music and think about, and something comes up, and the dish doesn't work out, but hopefully the music does.
Amazing how sometimes you need to do something completely different for creative ideas to flow. But it sounds like you were an absolutely perfect match, because the emotional depth that's in your music for these productions.
And also, look, gauging, do you want the music to flow in synchronicity? Do you, is the subject deep and you want the music to be deep? Or sometimes also to understand, am I supposed to bond with this theme through contrast? So maybe be a bit optimistic and buoyant, and give a sense of what also can come.
Yeah, and elevate it. Do you have any other similar exciting projects on the horizon? Like, I want to ask what's next for you creatively, but I'm mindful that a lot of artists can get frustrated by that, such an interview question.
Oh, okay. I'm okay. Everything's allowed in love, war, and interviews.
Thank you. It's very generous.
So after we've got this concert in May, and after that there is a Refugee Week concert at the Melbourne Recital Centre in late June, and that's with Sarai Illuminado with a 5-piece ensemble, and we'll also be working with some poets from former Yugoslavia. We've got a Bosnian and a Macedonian artist joining us to share their original work. And beyond that, I also work with the Resonant Heart Collective, which is, again, a group of women and female identifying artists, and they're artists of cold and BIPOC background often, and they were professional artists in their countries of origin. But sometimes what's missing, even for myself who did her tertiary studies here, it took a really long time for me to get like this freelancing literacy that I sometimes felt my peers, if they were Australian born, they just had it. They maybe had it because of receiving secondary education here, or I don't know, like there were always a couple of steps missing, even though I came quite young. And then add to that all these other obstructions. Like, I often work with artists who, play non-Western genres, whether they're folk genres or whether they're like non-Western classical practitioners. Like, I currently work with a North Indian classical musician and a Persian classical musician, as well as with a Persian dancer. So there will be also a couple of works coming up with the Resonant Heart Collective. We're performing in August and November, and then also who knows what else will, come in between.
Fantastic adventures ahead. Before I ask my last question, and we will play a song to wrap up as well, I want to ask if you could have the most perfect music venue for Sevda, for the kind of music you love to play, what would it be like?
It would sort of be like a tavern, a Balkan tavern, and Melbourne Recital Centre had a baby. and it's a Melbourne recital tavern, and we're not always sitting in the orientation of sort of opposition where we're facing each other, but we're somehow united, and we're in circles, or there is space in between audience so that we can actually blur boundaries and everyone can be a participant. So it would be a relaxed space wooden space. I'll get back to you on parquetry. But maybe definitely wooden floors. But there would be spaces that sort of allow this sense of communing with one another and that bring artists closer to audiences as opposed to sort of separating them. Yep.
Sounds like a fantastic provocation for the next M Pavilion or NGV Pavilion.
I was going to say, you know, architects of Melbourne, I'm totally up for conversation. If anyone's looking to design this, I'm available for a
Your
chat.
dream recital, tavern, tent.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Yeah.
I want to, before we play one of your last songs, I want to ask, what gives you hope?
My colleagues from my different ensembles and the fact that they keep coming back and we keep making this music. And, it is a moment. It sort of feels like a really simple thing to say, just jamming with my friends. But it's a really taxing moment for independent artists. It's hard to populate concerts, but, if we were waiting for that, we'd never make any work. So the fact that my friends, colleagues, and my musical family keeps coming back and making work with me and working through good times and the bad gives me a lot of hope. Like, that kind of resilience and consistency between people and among people gives me a lot of hope.
And it's a real strength and glue in creative communities as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me on the program tonight, Nela. And we'll leave the listeners with The Mermaid, a Sephardic folk song in Ladino performed by Saria Illuminato.